Sometimes we reach transitional points in life and we're not very sure what to do during these moments. It's during those moments that one needs to really stop for a moment, take a pause, reflect a little bit on their values, their life, where they have been, where are they going, where do they want to help. It's okay to have emotions and to be guided by it. And it's okay to have rational thought and be guided by it. These two are very important. But what leads you to the right action is the synthesis of both emotional thought, which is emotional intelligence, cognitive intelligence, but also we never have a big picture of what's going on.
Join us in the realm of holistic human, where we explore the essential elements that empower us to flourish, revealing our hidden potential and nurturing our growth.
Okay. Welcome to the latest episode of the Holistic Human Cast, where we discuss about the ingredients for a holistic and integral life. And this is the topic that we'll be touching on today. And we have Rani with us today, Rani Sherin Idris. And yeah, she has a background training in Bachelor of Arts in Political Sciences from NUS Singapore. Then she has a Master of Arts in Religious Studies from Erfurt, Germany in 2014. She is an Enneagram practitioner, and she also has training in integral theory and spiral dynamics. I'm looking at her CV right now, and I am lost in the amount of detail that she is and the amount of background training and certification that she has. But I'll let her fill in the gaps and tell us more about herself. But why is she on here today is that if you see my background and you see her background, you see there's some link behind that. Yes. And if I'm headed to Egypt for a spiritual pilgrimage, and Rani is like my resource person. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that today. And welcome, Rani.
Hi, hello, Dr. Yong. Thank you so much for having me on your amazing podcast.
You're most welcome, and thank you for joining us. Yeah, could you share a little bit about your background and how it shapes you and what you do?
Thank you for your kind words. You're really being very kind. I am currently now an integral consciousness coach, which is really a lifestyle coach, but focuses particularly on the big picture of things, how people develop, how people grow, their major milestones that they go through in life. Sometimes we reach transitional points in life and we're not very sure what to do during these moments. It's during those moments that one needs to really stop for a moment, take a pause, reflect a little bit on their values, their life, where they have been, where are they going, where do they want to go. As an integral consciousness coach, I focus really on that, where I look at a holistic view of the human being and look at most of these factors, their mental, their health, where they've been, what is their history, what is their values. Many of us, me included at the beginning of my journey, are not even aware what these values are, what is it that I'm all about, until we really take a pause and reflect. And as a coach, we simply facilitate this process for other people. We help them make that pause and then go through this reflection for them to figure out some of these values that mean so much to them, and where is it that they're headed in life and why. So that's what I really do as a coach now. But as you said, my background is a lot more than that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I got to this point in life, in my milestone, because of where I have come from. As you said, I initially did a bachelor's in political science from NUS because as a growing up kid, I'm a third culture kid. My mother is Egyptian, my dad is a Singaporean.
Mm-hmm.
And I was born and raised in Egypt, moved to Saudi Arabia for a few years, and then moved to Singapore. And you could see the differences in societies, in lifestyle, in cultures, in people, in relationships. It was quite very obvious for somebody who's making such a drastic change. And I could tell from a young age that conflicts are a very nice thing to have among people. And conflict seems to be the root cause of a lot of problems. But as a young child, I wasn't focused so much on conflicts in the home, or maybe I didn't have so much conflicts in the home. I was really focused on bigger picture conflicts. I was very aware of cultures, of countries, of geopolitics, just by virtue of what I studied. And there was a sense that I wanted to change these conflicting world, this chaotic world, and bring some peace to it. And that is what made me, such a young age, do a degree in political science, because my main objective was, how do we lessen the friction and the chaos and bring some peace to the world? I was very impacted by the word of Gandhi on nonviolence, by Martin Luther King, his civil rights movement. And I'm like, we could do this everywhere. Why not? But life always has it that when you try to make very big changes,
Mm.
life signals you and tells you that first you have to start with the man in the mirror. Maybe it's not the world that needs to change. I didn't figure out that I needed to change immediately. I had one more stop. I grew up Muslim,
Mm.
and at that time, 2011, 2014, there was the September 11th,
11.
terrorism. So the conflicts in the world seem to be stemming from my own religious background, from
Mm.
my community.
Mm.
And while I knew that extremists did not really represent the rest of peace-loving Muslims, many of us felt the need to justify or to figure out and try to see what's going on and what's wrong in the world. And so if I can't change the world, maybe I need to figure out if the source of conflicts is really religion and if there's something we can do about it.
Mm.
And that's why I pursued a master's degree in religious studies, because I'm like, okay, how do we resolve conflicts through religious, through the religious route?
Wow. I could see that your initial entry point into political science, then the religious studies. You're really and I feel like an old soul who thinks about the biggest problems in the world. And that's where you are gravitating to. And I could feel your heart, the spaciousness and the how to say the capacity of heart to consider these problems in a world scale. I find that really wonderful.
I think you will see down the line that while this might be true on one level,
Mm.
and I'll get to that in a minute,
Mm.
sometimes we do this
Mm.
because we want to cover up on some internal stuff. We don't have the capacity for internals. But I'll get to that in a minute. Yes, I started big. I had the capacity for big visions.
Mhm.
And when I went in to do my master's in religious studies, I actually discovered that religious were all peace loving themselves. The root of religion was peace loving. And the problem really lied in the way people interpreted these religious texts,
Mm.
in the interpretation, their value system, their eyes, their perceptions and perspectives. And then I was so astounded because religions were really not the culprits. It was people and their perception and their psychological states. And then I had to
Agree.
pause. I stopped, I left, took a pause, and I was like, what is this about consciousness? What is this about perception? What is this about people? And this was to me a very big question mark. And if my fingers are always pointing outwards, the world is wrong, the religion is wrong, people are wrong. I had not at any point of time stopped to see that three other fingers were pointing at
Pointing
my
right.
own. And maybe the issue is happening with me. I did not look at that at all at the beginning of my long journey. And so I subsequently had to, it took me a really long time to start to look inward. I did continue to work in the field of religious studies and Islamic discourse for another 8 more years in Singapore as a policy maker when it comes to the socio-religious life in Singapore. But during that period, I knew that I had to start to look inward for what my values were and how am I contributing to this problem if there was any. And because I was wondering about perceptions and people and what is that block that's causing people to be so conflicting, I stumbled upon Enneagram and the integral theory. I stumbled upon them by absolute serendipitous moment that I wasn't aware. It was at my lowest point where I was so unsure of what I should be doing next that there was just this ray of light, a video that showed up on my Facebook one day.
Ding.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Then I came across Enneagram and integral theory, which really did two things for me. One, it showed me that the problem of people and perception did lie with people and perception. It's all about our psychology. And two, it was the same for me. I would never be able to see other people's point of view clearly and why they're doing what they're doing until I understood myself. So the whole Socratic saying of know thyself really became very true. I had to really first get to know myself Why am I running away from my problems by looking at bigger issues in the world, and focus on healing myself before I can even consider or have the true and real capacity to then heal the world, which is what I now try to do as a coach after having gone through a long period of then healing myself through the work of the Enneagram and integral theory.
I feel the same. My venture into spirituality also started, or it came back to finding myself and learning the lessons I needed to learn before I could really serve, and to really look at my problems, who I am, and the issues that I have before we can really build a foundation to build bigger and better things for the world. And like you said, it starts with the man in the mirror. It starts with us. The first steps begins within.
That is absolutely true.
And could you tell us a little bit more about Enneagram and a little bit more about integral theory by Ken Wilber?
Yeah, Enneagram and integral theory. Wow, we were here also to talk about Egypt. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the origins of the Enneagram. Enneagram is what is known to people to be a personality type. It's a 9 type or a categorization of people into 9 different types. But why 9? Why 9? And why this symbol? And where did this symbol come from? And why is it different from other typologies, right? The beginning of the Enneagram, it is said, was that it really started in ancient Egypt. It was one of the symbols that was found in ancient Egypt in different configurations.
Interesting.
It was found at the shape that we see it today on Pythagoras' books, where he was talking about sacred geometry. And ancient Egypt was very big on spirituality. And part of the spiritual order that the ancient Egyptians had was that the perception of the divine was that there was one divine that was the source of life, but he had a pantheon of gods, which is how people would then understand it, because they might not be able to fathom a divine unity. And so he would have these pantheon of gods. Interestingly, these pantheons, despite that there were many of them, were always 9 in number. They were always 9 in number. And the reason why 9 is very interesting is because it is seen as the number of wholeness. It is the number that symbolizes absolute wholeness. If you look at any issue from 9 different angles, you've technically looked at it from a complete whole. And where 9 comes from is because you've got a unity, which is one God, and then there's always he then created sort of a duality. There is God, which is the source, the light, and then there's shadow. There's light and shadow. So now there's God, light, and shadow, which is 3. 3 is another big number. And each of them have their own 3. So 3 by 3 is 9, and 9 is the complete number. That's the most interesting about the type 9. And that's where the origins of the Enneagram really comes from. It comes from a spiritual root.
I just want to add in is that when you mentioned there's this one God and this pantheon of gods and deities, it is similar to Hinduism, where there's so many deities, but each of them represents an aspect of divinity. And it's only then that makes it easier for people to see the individual aspects and the ideals, the values, the principles that this particularly nectar or deity carry, and how to embody it. Yeah.
You see the idea of the pantheon of gods in various different religions. You also see it in Greek mythology with Zeus, and it's also a pantheon of gods. Some say that the ancient Egyptian civilization and their spiritual order had consolidated what came before it, but because it was so documented so well and established so well at that time, it gave a strong foundation to many different then spiritualities and religious traditions that came after it. So some of these ideas you will still see. And the Greeks and the pharaohs, when they would go to their devotions and their contemplative practices in temples, these ancient temples that they created, they would sit there and try and wonder. One of their main questions was, why do people do so-called bad things, right? Why do they go wayward? And at the end of the day, they figure it is because of basic instincts, passion, and our ego system. Our ego makes us do certain things. And that's when the ancient Egyptians themselves were creating what was called the diseases of the heart, the illnesses of the heart. And the heart was the most important organ. And so everything that we're saying here, really, while it may seem like it's very far away, but that is at the heart of the Enneagram. Enneagram is an extremely spiritual, a psycho-spiritual tool for personality types. And even though it originated from a very spiritual context, and it was imbued with such spiritual meanings, it was picked up in the 1960s by a psychologist in the US, who at that time was studying personality types and behaviors. And when he tried to mix it together and integrate both of them together, he came up with what we know today as the Enneagram of personality.
I see. I see.
So that's what most people know, Enneagram of personality. As a coach, when I use the Enneagram as a tool, we begin with it as a personality typing tool. And then you move on to look at the unique gift each person would then have imbued to him from his own heart, from within. Which once we have access to it, by access, we really mean that you've removed all of the distractions and the noises and the monkey mind, and you're able to discern the voice of reason and the voice of truth within you. You are able to see what your true calling is. And that's what we do as a coach, as an Enneagram coach, as an integral coach as well.
And huge similarities in Enneagram as well as human design, but we will leave the topic for another day. And you can tell us a little bit more about integral theory then.
Sure. Integral theory is also another amazing tool, right? It has it also another one of the best things about these tools is that it's really a culmination of a lot of human wisdom. It wasn't created just yesterday. It has its history in something called spiral dynamics. Subsequently, it moved to become spiral dynamics integral. And then Ken Wilber, who is still alive among us today, who is seen as a philosopher, really tried to integrate much of the discourses of human development and the disciplines of human development into one holistic, wholesome theory, which is what he calls the integral theory. And this integral theory really looks at human development holistically. So while it goes through your development from being a child all the way to adulthood, it also looks at your cognitive development. It also looks at your spiritual development. It also looks as your collective development. So not only as individual, but also collectively as societies. How do you also develop? And that's why at the end of the day, these are, I won't say predictions, these are consolidations. And a lot of people say, while these maps for us to be able to navigate like where we came from and where we're going as an individual or as a collective, we also have to remind each other that the map is not the territory. So these are maps that have been put for us to navigate our lives, but they don't dictate how we see or how we co-create our life moving forward. So what they have seen as a trajectory is that there is an evolution that's ongoing consistently from the day of our creation or how we came to be. And it doesn't seem to stop. And this evolution is really an evolution of consciousness. It's the way we think, the way we feel, the way we behave. It's feeling, thoughts, and behavior. And it's all integrated into one. And that never stops. And it evolves into one certain direction. Part of that evolution that they look into and why it is very interesting as compared to others and why it's holistic is because it also looks at time, the way we've evolved over time as a collective. So in the past, we were very traditional in our outlook. Then after that, we became very modern and we said no to traditions, no to spirituality. Religion is bad. Let's have a separation of state and church. Dogmatic religion is bad. Science and rationality is going to be the order of the day. But we've seen with time that modernity as we know it, with all its massive, amazing progress it has offered us and has gifted us, it has some of its downturns. And it has looked into the integral theory, has looked into what would happen in a not just a postmodern world where you just deconstruct everything that modernity has done and then you're left with nothing. But what would happen if in a meta modern world you try and consolidate it instead? Bring some of the good things from the past, bring some of the good things from spirituality, some of the good things from religion, together with some of the good things of modernity, and create a world that might then make sense. Because maybe the antidote of some of the problems we have in the world today could be found in our pre-modern traditional spiritual and religious tradition. Well, it might be.
Wow.
And so they bring about this idea and they ask us, would you consider? And for people who come from the background of spirituality, I honor that. I like that. I see a lot of value in that. I grew up Muslim. I had some issues with being dogmatic because I see how it can hold you back. But I knew that you needed to, as you transcend religious dogma, you needed to include some of the positive values that you are meant to have with you as you evolve and progress. That's integral theory in its various aspects, and how also I use it as both a coach and also as an activist trying to bring about some peace into the world in the work that I'm.
Wow. Wow. And I wanted to just elaborate a little bit over there is that this process of distillation, we undergo, be it religion or learning period that we have, to shed off what doesn't serve us anymore and to bring the essence, principles that really makes the difference or we find it ideal for the current era or time period, and to bring that into light and to spread that particular message. And as you bring into, you started with political science, religious studies, and what you wanted to do was that you wanted to help solve like what's wrong with the world. And your journey has been like picking up different techniques and skills to answer that question. And you mentioned that you were inspired by Gandhi, which is a pacifist movement leader. And which brings us into the next section, which we talk about subtle activism. And people understand activism as we need to stand up for what's right. We need to fight the injustice. We need to battle against all the horror that's happening. But sometimes what we do not see is that violence begets violence. And we become perpetrators of the things that we actually want to avoid. We become the man that's driving the machinery that is causing destruction, and we have a hand in that, and we do not see that. And in our last discussion between me and Rani, she mentioned something called subtle activism, and I felt that, oh, this is really interesting. And yeah, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, for sure. And the world, the way it is going on now, with the wars going on, with everything that's going on, it is very easy to lose our patience and be very reactive. Like, you need to make things right now. You need to stop this war right now, which is true. There is space and room for direct action and direct activism. But there's two things I've learned from my journey. Maybe I would say main lessons. Number one is that when you're too emotional, there's nothing wrong with emotions, but if you're too emotional, that it's the one that's in control of you, then that's not very healthy. It's okay to have emotions and to be guided by it. And it's okay to have rational thought and be guided by it. These two are very important. But what leads you to the right action is the synthesis of both emotional thought, which is emotional intelligence, cognitive intelligence, but also we never have a big picture of what's going on. So there's something I've learned called spiritual intelligence, which is an intuitive voice that tells you, should I really react this way right now? Is that the only right action to do? Or should I wait it out? What if I wait it out? Am I being guilty of just being a bystander, another killer? You cannot let emotions, you can't let rationality also on its own rules, because that rationality without emotions, we just become robot. That's just also not the same.
And if we let emotions run the show, there's a tendency for what me and my wife used to call emotional hijack, where the amygdala hijacks our frontal lobe, our cognitive processes, and it just overrides everything, and then it acts out our reptilian survival instincts. And when it runs the show, usually the outcome may not be that lovely. Yes, and I'll let you continue.
And it might not be what's intended. Like today, you've already developed all of this neurophysiology that you have for a reason. You're not meant to move with only your reptilian brain. You've got two other brains. Why not get them integrated and move together as a holistic human being so that you're able to figure out what the right action is, right? Exactly. And rationality alone is also not the right thing. And so there is other than the neurophysiology of our being, we also have subtle faculty. So for our vision, we have insight. For our hearing, we have intuition. Our heart is not just a pumping blood machine. Our heart is the seat of reception. It's a receptacle organ that receives the slightest of vibration. And it feels the movement, feels all these subtle movements. When you have insight and you've got intuition and you're in tune with your surroundings and you marry that reflexively, that's what's really called as spiritual intelligence. You've got access to your own subtle faculty. You're able to tell how I should be moving, to do something or not to do something. It takes a very, let's not say a long time, but it takes serious intentionality for you to say, I would like to really access my own spiritual and subtle faculty. We have that. Sometimes people, when they see the word spiritual, they think some woo stuff out there. Or it, it's, you've heard yourself inside your ears. You have internal dialogue. We all have internal dialogues all the time. And sometimes in Buddhism and other traditions, say, please quiet down the monkey mind so you can hear your own voice. So there are many voices inside. And that's where we need to have the sense of discernment. Which of this is noise and which of this is intuition? One of them, if we're connected, one of them is telling you to do something. And when you have this intentionality in your life, yes, I truly am going to take all the steps that I can to quieten down the monkey mind. And by quieten, you don't just dismiss, you still hear them out. Because the whole point of being holistic is that each of these sounds that we have in our head is here to tell us a message. Some of it is from our childhood programming. It's still telling us things, still the sound that's playing since we were kids. If we're able to observe and know which is this sound that's still thinking and behaving the way it did as a child, we don't have to dismiss it harshly. We can just say, thank you very much. I knew you were here to help me at a younger stage of my life. I am no longer there. I appreciate all that you have to do for me. I've got it now. And then these voices would then quiet down the monkey mind. And I like to say it this way because sometimes I feel when I tell my monkey mind to keep quiet, the monkey inside keeps jumping even more.
Yeah.
I'm
Yes.
a monkey. Try to tell me
Exactly.
something.
Exactly. What doesn't get heard tries to make its presence felt. And I love the word you use, discernment. It's like having all this type of information coming in from our background, from our intuition, from our rational mind, from emotional mind, and then being centered, being grounded enough to listen to each of those voices, for lack of a better word, and then discerning is which path should I take? And that's the intelligence that we need to have. And do you agree?
I totally agree. And before we get to the point where we will discern and decide which action, you first have to really sit down with yourself and listen to all these voices. Give them space, give them time, give them attention. So listen to each of these thoughts because they're all telling you a message. And when you put each of these voices in place and reassure them, That's where it becomes easy to be like, okay, and so now it becomes clear that what I need to do is not follow the fear. For example, the voice of fear was that voice of my childhood that was telling me something because blah, 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 blah happened in my, so it's protecting. So to follow the voice of fear now would be following up. So you put that aside. And then as you eliminate these voices and you put them in place, naturally, the one that's left, you're like, there you go. It just organically happens. You don't have to crack your brain. I don't know what to do. And that's what we call serendipitous moment. It just happens to us. And we've all felt it at one point of time. You're like, it just came to me the other day, especially when you're showering during the day. It just came to me. I just knew what I needed to do.
Yes, wonderful.
Yeah. So that's spiritual intelligence, which is the foundation for what we then would call subtle activism. Subtle activism just simply is an idea that tries to say not all activism have to be out there in action. As we do inner work for ourselves, we need to figure out what is the inner work that's needed for any conflict that's happening, whether it's between me and in my own relationship or in a community or in society or global. These are conflicts, which means there is some form of dis-ease, some form of disharmony. You sit down a little bit with it, don't dismiss it. I'll give you an example. Somebody who's obese. If you go to somebody and be like, okay, you go and go to a doctor, you're obese. Okay, it can cause you this here, take these pills and lose weight. And then go to a personal trainer. Go to a personal trainer, he puts you on a diet, you follow all these exercises and you do all these things and somehow either it works for a while and it doesn't work. You heal with your weight until you sit down and go like, why am I actually really overweight? Why am I? What are the emotions? Am I eating to fill a gap? What's going on? What's the big picture? And then you start to answer the root causes. When you answer the root causes, while you're also doing your exercise and also taking the pill, you don't dismiss the
Yes,
other
yes. Yes, yes.
you integrate them all together. You have a more sustainable, more long-term, more cleaner solution. You know?
Yes. Sustainable is key. Yeah.
Sustainable is key. So that's what I mean by we have to do the inner work for ourselves, for conflicts we have within ourselves. And it's the same with activism for out there. When I say inner work, you could sit there and contemplate. So there's contemplative prayers. You could do psychological work. What is the world suffering from? What is all these wars really telling us? Sometimes, not sometimes. This is how I truly feel about, say, current Israel and Gaza war. At the end of the day, it is a wounded person wounding another wounded person. And like you said, violence begets violence. The root cause of that is trauma, just breeds trauma. I'm in a state of fear, and you're in a state of fear, and we cannot have a loving situation because, and when we sit down and look at all these traumatic events, you solve at an internal level. So whether it's contemplative prayer or meditation or healing work.
And I just want to add a little that this came from Vishen Lakhiani, and he quotes somebody else, but I remember it came from him. Is hurt people. Yes, yes, and I'll let you continue.
Yes, wounded, wounding, wounded. But there's an antidote to that I recently read somewhere that a healed person is healing another healed person, and the cycle of healing can then start to take place. So we don't necessarily have to always constantly be focused on the wounded and the violence and the fear and the traumas. We can start, once you've healed yourself, start to bring about this light to the world slowly, one candle at a time, until it gradually brings about. And that's the core of then subtle activism, that in our spiritual traditions, we have all these access to practices that can help us reflect on our state and contemplate on it And as we change ourselves, naturally the world changes. And when we do it as a collective, it also brings about healing collective.
What you described sounds really beautiful, and that's the purpose of like group meditation prayers, and to create that shift in consciousness. And it's like a global wide kind of shift in thoughts and consciousness. And yeah, I can't believe it that we've been talking for about almost an hour already. And it's such a nice thing to have this discourse with you and to learn from your perspective and what you learn and what you do and how you look at the world and your perspective. And it's really refreshing. If there's what also things that you could let our listeners take home, right? Or what could they do next? Or what could they start reading up on? What would that be?
There are many books out there, but most important book of peace is our inner. So I'd say read yourself, learn to read yourself. Even if it's just spending 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes before you sleep, just do a scan. How are you feeling this morning, in the evening after the day's over? And ask yourself the simplest question of, why do I think I feel this way? Try and read yourself, feel your emotions. If you're able to name them, and if you can even ask why, then you're so advanced. Then we're all very advanced, because it's reading ourselves and just naming our emotions sometimes can be difficult, and it takes a lot of courage.
And I will add to that is that everything starts from awareness, and awareness is the first step. Internal awareness is also the first step to bring it to the outer world. And yeah, that's really beautiful. Thank you so much, Rani, for your time and for your wisdom. And yeah, looking forward to the Egypt trip and also to receive the epiphanies and the wisdom from the knowledge keepers and to share with the world. And so glad to know you, Rani, and to learn from you. And with that, we'll come to close to this session of the Holistic Human Podcast. And goodbye.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for watching. Please hit the subscribe, like and bell button to stay updated in our latest videos. Thank you.